I had just moved to a new city for a job, and as a recent college graduate, I didn't have much. I had a few boxes of clothes and personal items, but no furniture or anything useful. My budget was tight, and I needed a reliable bicycle to get around, so I figured I'd check out the free listings on a local community app. If you've ever browsed those free listings, you know it's hit or miss. Some offers are completely unreasonable, like people giving away old furniture that's falling apart, but I was hoping to find something decent. After searching for a while, I stumbled upon an ad that grabbed my attention. Brand new bicycle, never used, free to pick up. The post was posted just a few minutes ago, and I immediately felt the need to act fast before someone else snatched it up. I quickly messaged the seller asking if it was still available and that I was interested. Within minutes, I got a reply. "It's all yours if you can pick it up tonight after 8 p.m. I found it odd that the person wanted to meet so late, but I assumed they were busy with work or something, so I agreed. Around 7:30 p.m., I texted the seller saying I was on my way. I entered the address into my phone and saw that it was a bit out of the way, in a quiet, wooded area. The GPS said it would take me about 40 minutes, but I shrugged it off. I wasn't too familiar with the area, but figured I'd find my way. As I drove, the roads became more isolated. The houses thinned out, and soon I was driving down narrow, winding paths through dense trees. After 40 minutes, the GPS indicated I had arrived. The house was in a small clearing with nothing else around for miles. It looked a bit abandoned, but the bike was still listed as available. I sent the seller a message letting them know I had arrived and got a quick response. "Great, come to the front door." I approached the house, and as I stepped onto the porch, I felt a shiver run down my spine. The house was completely dark with no lights on. I knocked on the door, and a voice from the other side called out, "It's open, just come on in." I hesitated but then decided to go inside. The door creaked as I opened it, and I entered, squinting in the darkness. I could barely make out the shape of a hallway leading deeper into the house. I called out, "Hello?" The voice responded from behind a door on the right. "The bike's in here, come on back," they said. At this point, I was really starting to feel uneasy. The house had an eerie silence, and there was something unsettling about the whole situation. I quickly replied, "No, I'm good, I'll just leave," and turned around. I hurriedly made my way back to the door, and when I opened it, I glanced back one more time. Through the window, I saw two men standing in the shadows, staring out at me. They didn't move. I ran to my car, got inside, and locked the doors. I drove off without a second thought, my heart racing. Back home, I checked my phone and found 3 new messages from the seller. The first asked why I had left. The second asked if I still wanted the bicycle, but the third message was what really disturbed me. "You made the right choice." That was the last time I ever tried picking up anything from online listings. A few weeks ago, I had to travel to a small town for work, and I needed to find a place to stay while I was there. I didn't know the area well, so I decided to search online for available rentals. After browsing a bit, I came across a few listings for apartments that seemed promising. One in particular stood out to me, and the landlord seemed like a decent guy when I emailed him. We scheduled an appointment for me to view the place later that afternoon. He asked me to call an hour before my arrival to confirm I was coming, which seemed standard enough. So, an hour before the meeting, I gave him a quick call, but he didn't pick up. I didn't think much of it, though, assuming he was busy. I decided to go ahead and make my way to the apartment and hoped he would be there when I arrived. About an hour later, as I was approaching, the guy finally called me back. He asked if I was still coming, and I told him I was only about 5 minutes away. His response caught me off guard. He was upset, saying that I wasn't supposed to arrive for another hour. At that moment, I realized I had messed up. I didn't adjust my phone for the time zone change when I traveled. My phone was still on the time zone of where I came from. I apologized and explained that I was early, but the guy seemed pretty irate. I tried to smooth things over, suggesting that I could just hang out nearby until the right time, but he insisted I shouldn't show up yet. By this point, I was a little uneasy, but I figured I'd give him the benefit of the doubt. So I decided to kill some time by getting food at a nearby cafe, planning to go back to the apartment when it was closer to the scheduled time. When I arrived at the apartment later, I was greeted by the landlord. He was in his mid-50s, and honestly, he didn't look very well kept. His clothes were disheveled, and he smelled like he hadn't bathed in days. I tried to shake off the discomfort I felt, reminding myself that I needed a place to stay, but the whole situation was starting to feel off. As we toured the apartment, I noticed a man suddenly leaving from a back door. He was young, scruffy, and looked like he didn't belong there. He spotted us, made a quick exit, and rushed to his car. The landlord mentioned he had been looking at the apartment earlier, but I didn't feel reassured. The landlord then started asking me strange personal questions. He was overly curious about my age and what my job was, and he asked in a way that felt more invasive than a normal landlord-tenant conversation. The whole time he stared at me with an unnerving intensity, never blinking. Eventually, he led me through the apartment to show me the bonus room, which was in the back of the house. This room was part of the garage but felt like an afterthought, dusty and neglected. He mentioned there was a shed out back I could look at as well, which seemed odd, but I followed him outside. The shed was detached from the house, and when we got there, I noticed there were stairs leading down into total darkness. The landlord flicked a light switch at the top of the stairs, but nothing happened. Without hesitation, he began walking down into the darkness. I stood frozen, unsure of what to do. He looked up at me from the bottom of the stairs and said, "Aren't you coming down?" I froze. It was a bizarre and unsettling request. This wasn't something a normal landlord would ask. I glanced over my shoulder to the house, and I could see another person standing in the yard watching me. My heart began racing, and my instincts screamed at me to get out of there. I turned and ran as fast as I could, not looking back. I ran through the woods for about a mile, feeling the rush of adrenaline pumping through my veins. Thankfully, I didn't see anyone following me. When I finally stopped and caught my breath, I realized how close I had come to something potentially dangerous. I was in the middle of nowhere with no one around, and I had narrowly escaped an unnerving situation. I used my phone's GPS to find my way back to the hotel where I was staying, but I kept looking over my shoulder just in case. Back at the hotel, I Googled the address of the apartment. To my shock, I found that the place had been abandoned for years. The listing had been removed by the time I looked again. I debated reporting it to the police, but ultimately decided against it, unsure of what they could do with just the deleted ad in my experience. To this day, I can't help but think that the whole thing was some kind of setup. Maybe the people I met that day had bad intentions. Whatever it was, I've never trusted listings like that again. A while back, my wife and I were looking for a used car, and after searching for a few days, we came across a listing that seemed too good to be true. The car was listed at an incredibly low price, and the photos made it look almost brand new. We sent the seller a message right away, expressing our interest, and he responded almost immediately. The communication seemed completely normal, and he agreed to meet us at a public location, the parking lot of a popular shopping center. We arranged to meet in the evening after he got off work, around 5:30 p.m. We arrived at the shopping center right on time, and we texted the seller to let him know where we were parked. However, he replied almost immediately, saying he was running a bit late. No big deal, we thought. It's not uncommon for things to get delayed. An hour passed and we were both growing a little impatient, but we were still hopeful that the car would be worth the wait. The seller then texted us saying he was nearly there, but that he'd prefer to meet somewhere else. He gave us an address for a gas station about 30 minutes away, in an area that wasn't particularly great. It wasn't a 24-hour station, and when we checked, it was already closed. At this point, my wife started getting nervous, pointing out how many red flags there were, but I was focused on the deal. The car was such a good price, and I really wanted to check it out. We decided to go, figuring it was just a minor inconvenience. When we arrived at the gas station, the entire area felt deserted. It was getting darker, and there weren't many cars around. We noticed the car we were supposed to meet had been parked in a very dark corner of the lot, away from the few other vehicles that were parked. I pulled up to the car, but something didn't sit right. I had a gut feeling something was off. I got out of the car and took a closer look, only to find that the situation was even worse than I had imagined. Right in the middle of the road, blocking my path, was a spike strip a clear sign that this was some kind of setup. My heart started racing as I realized we had walked right into a trap. I quickly got back in the car, backed up, and drove off the way we came. We didn't stop to check anything else, and we didn't look back. Once we were safely back home, I called the police and reported the incident. I didn't see anyone, but the spike strip and the suspicious nature of the whole situation made it clear that something wasn't right. The ad was taken down a few days later, and we never heard anything from the seller again. Looking back, I can only imagine how dangerous that situation could have been. If I had gone any closer to the car or had gotten out, who knows what could have happened. Since then, I've been much more cautious when it comes to buying things online, especially on platforms like Facebook Marketplace. What seemed like a good deal at the time almost turned into something much worse. A few months ago, I moved into a new apartment in a city I wasn't too familiar with. I was still getting used to the area and had just started settling in. Since my budget was tight, I didn't have much to furnish my place. I decided to check out online marketplace listings for free items, hoping to find a few things to get by. I wasn't expecting anything amazing, but anything free would help. After scrolling for a while, I came across a listing that caught my eye. Free package, pickup only. The description said it was an unopened box with an unknown origin, available for pickup in a nearby neighborhood. I thought it was odd, but it intrigued me. The idea of a free package was strange, but it didn't seem like a scam, so I figured I'd go check it out. The listing had just been posted, so I messaged the seller and they replied almost instantly. The message said, "It's still available. I'm home all afternoon if you want to come get it." They gave me an address that was just a short drive away, so I grabbed my keys and decided to head over. When I arrived at the address, I found myself in a quiet residential neighborhood. The house was at the end of a cul-de-sac, and there wasn't a single car parked in the driveway. It seemed unusually quiet, but I brushed it off, thinking it was just a peaceful area. I texted the seller that I had arrived, and almost immediately I got a response. "Just leave the package outside the door. I'll be watching from the window." I wasn't sure what that meant, but it seemed strange. I stood there for a moment, looking at the house. I noticed the windows were all covered with dark curtains, which made the whole place look abandoned. It was a bit unsettling, but I decided to proceed. I walked up to the porch, and sure enough, there was a large package sitting in front of the door. It was taped up tightly with no markings or labels of any kind. I felt a strange chill in the air as I reached down to grab it. As soon as I picked it up, I heard a sound from inside the house. Footsteps. I looked around, but there was no one in sight. Just as I was about to turn around and leave, I noticed movement from the corner of my eye. A shadow passed by one of the windows. Now I was starting to get uneasy. I texted the seller again, asking if they were sure I could just take the package, but there was no response. I started walking back to my car, clutching the package tightly. As I reached my car and was about to put the box in the trunk, I heard a loud bang from the house. It was so loud it made me jump, and I quickly glanced back toward the house. The front door swung open, and someone stepped out onto the porch. They were wearing a hoodie, and their face was obscured by the hood. I couldn't make out any features, but they were watching me closely. Without thinking, I jumped into my car, locked the doors, and drove off as fast as I could. My heart was racing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly avoided something terrible. Once I got home, I sat in my car for a few minutes, trying to calm myself down. My hands were shaking, and I couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. I opened the package, hoping it was just some random items that would explain the whole situation. But when I opened the box, there was nothing inside but a small, unmarked envelope. I carefully pulled it out, only to find a single piece of paper with a message scrawled in strange handwriting. "You shouldn't have come here." My stomach dropped. I immediately threw the paper and the box in the trash. I still don't know who sent it or what the whole thing was about, but I've never used any online marketplaces since then. The whole situation was just too strange, and I don't want to take any more chances. I've learned that sometimes the things that seem like a simple deal aren't always what they appear,